Prague, 2019. A CIA agent named Joe is badly wounded during a shootout in a room. When another enemy agent enters, Joe pretends to be dead. Seizing the moment, he grabs his gun and shoots the agent. Suddenly, another enemy from Alarum, named Laura, kicks Joe from behind. They struggle, and both end up crashing through the window, landing on the roof of a car. Laura then asks Joe what he plans to do after the mission. Joe replies, "No plans." From that moment, the two unexpectedly fall in love. 5 years later, Laura and Joe are now married and spending their honeymoon in Poland. They wake up and head out for lunch with another French couple, Bridget and Roland. During the meal, Bridget asks how they met. Laura lies, saying they met in Sao Paulo during Joe's business trip and fell in love. Changing the subject, Joe asks Roland about his injured leg. Roland says it's not healed yet, but mentions planning a trek in the woods to aid his recovery. Meanwhile, Joe glances outside, as if expecting something or someone to show up. That night, Laura examines a device, SATCOM, that displays a message about a change in the weather. It seems like she is still working for Alarum. When Joe enters the room, she informs him that it's not related to them. It's a local issue. She also tells him she won't join the trek because she needs to stay on standby. It becomes clear that they are hiding from the government and secretly on a mission. Joe then grabs his gun and some bullets before heading into the woods for the trek, while Laura and Roland stay back in the room. After this, we see pilots flying a plane when someone suddenly points a gun at them from behind and shoots, causing the plane to crash in the middle of the woods. Meanwhile, Joe is trekking with Bridget when they hear the sound of the plane overhead. Confused, Bridget remarks that there's no airport nearby and wonders why there's a plane. Joe immediately leaves the plane. Back at the room, Laura notices smoke rising in the distance, coming from the crashed plane. Joe and the other trekkers arrive at the crash site. He quickly tells them to return to the resort, but Bridget insists on staying, claiming she's a doctor and can help. Joe reluctantly agrees, and the two approach the wreckage. Inside the plane, they find the two pilots shot dead. Bridget points out that if they were shot in the plane, the shooter must still be nearby. As they examine the pilots more closely, they notice a strange mark on their necks, letter A written on it, which means he is a Alarum agent, which made him believe that something really shady is going on in the port city of Poland. Suddenly, the radio system on the plane starts to play. Bridget urges Joe to answer it, but instead, he deliberately grabs it and throws it away. Meanwhile, Director Burbridge and his team are monitoring the radio transmissions from the crashed plane, listening in on Joe's conversations. Agent Kirby suddenly recognizes Joe's voice and informs Burbridge that Joe was one of their agents who had been missing for years. Burbridge demands their location, and Kirby confirms they're in Poland. At this point, Burbridge's true intentions become clear. He's concerned that Joe might have betrayed them and possibly joined Alarum. Burbridge wants to control the situation by retrieving the flash drive and ensuring Joe doesn't expose any sensitive information or make a move against their operation. Back in Poland, Joe pulls out a knife and begins cutting into one of the pilot's stomachs. Bridget watches in shock as he retrieves a flash drive from inside. When she nervously asks what it is, Joe smirks and jokes, "It's a flight pill." Suddenly, a group of mercenaries led by Orlin arrives at the crash site to locate a flash drive. Joe quickly tells to Bridget not to say anything about flash drive. Orlin then demands to know what happened. The trek guide steps forward and explains that they were trekking nearby when they heard the crash. They came to offer help, but find that the pilots were already dead. Orlin then talks to Bridget, telling her that she must have come to offer help and must be a nurse. Bridget responds in French, and without warning, Orlin shoots her. Orlin then points a gun at Joe and asks him if he shoots him. Joe replies that he should search the plane first. Then, Orlin men hold him at gunpoint. Just then, Joe grabs the men's gun and starts shooting at them and manages to escape. Meanwhile, Laura is with Roland when she suddenly hears gunshots. She pulls out her device and checks for updates, which instructs her to close shop and keep Roland alive. She then takes Roland to safety as his legs are injured. The film then shifts to pre-Sov, where another agent, Chester, is introduced. He receives a call from Burbridge. Burbridge orders Chester to eliminate Joe because he believes Joe may have betrayed the CIA and joined Alarum. Meanwhile, Laura takes Roland to the room and teaches him how to defend himself in case anyone tries to break in. Meanwhile, Joe is running through the jungle with a group of mercenaries in pursuit. A shootout erupts, and Joe skillfully takes down several of the armed men. Eventually, he hides in a dense thicket, trying to catch his breath. Orlin arrives and, unaware of Joe's location, shouts a warning. He declares that Joe won't make it out alone and reveals their next move. They plan to head to the resort and eliminate everyone there or take them hostage. Back at the resort, Orlan's men seal off the area and storm into Laura's room. However, she swiftly takes them down, killing all of them before they can harm her or Roland. Meanwhile, Joe reaches a nearby town. Breaking into a garage, he sneaks inside and uses a phone to call Director Burbridge. Joe asks Burbridge about the crashed plane, and the director replies that they are still assembling data on it. Joe then asks if Burbridge is aware that Orlan is there. Burbridge reveals that Orlan was actually on the plane before it crashed. Joe tells him about the flash drive he retrieved from the pilot's stomach and offers to return it in exchange for his forgiveness. Burbridge, however, is more focused on the flash drive and its potential contents. Joe then asks Burbridge to tell Chester to meet him at treasure hunting and abruptly hangs up the call. He then calls Laura and she tells him to meet at Sobchak house. Meanwhile, Chester arrives at the location carrying a lethal poison injection, intending to kill Joe. Burbridge calls him to give the order: retrieve the flash drive and eliminate both Joe and Laura. After the call, Chester heads to meet Joe at treasure hunting. He asks about the flash drive, but Joe claims he hasn't found it. Chester sees a bottle of vodka and they both drink it. Chester then goes to freshen up, leaving Joe to notice the injection. Joe quickly fills the syringe and takes it for himself. When Chester returns, Joe pulls out his gun and confronts him about the injection. Chester reveals that it's a KR-45, a lethal weapon developed by America. Suddenly, a group of mercenaries surrounds their house. Chester hands Joe an AA-12 shotgun, and together they take down every agent in their path. Meanwhile, Laura arrives at the resort, where Orlan is holding some villagers hostage. She stealthily takes out several of Orlan's goons and proceeds toward the room where the hostages are kept. As she eliminates the guards, reinforcements arrive and a fierce shootout ensues. Despite her efforts, Laura is ultimately overpowered and captured by Orlan's men. Back at the house, Joe and Chester remain inside after eliminating the attackers. Suddenly, Orlan appears outside, furious with his men. He scolds them for failing to kill 2 men despite having the advantage in numbers, and instead shoots his own men. Inside the house, Chester brings up Laura, accusing her of joining Alarum and warning that she will surely try to convince Joe to join as well. Joe admits that Laura has tried to persuade him, but he insists he has no interest in joining. While Joe looks outside, Chester secretly pulls out the lethal injection and stabs it into Joe, coldly informing him that he now has only 1 hour to live. Chester then fires a shot at the nearby electricity pole, cutting off power in the area and further enraging Orlan. Furious, Orlan orders his men to fire at all the windows of the house. They continue their attack, but Joe and Chester are not come out. Orlan then brings some of his men inside to check it. The both are inside and takes out the goon. Chester then throws the grenade, causing the house to hole. During this, a flash drive slips away from Joe's pocket, and Chester grabs it and leaves. Meanwhile, Orlan's man, Kroll, interrogates Laura and notices a small A symbol on her neck. He searches her clothes and finds a device, a SATCOM. Kroll demands she use it to contact her superior and order them to hand over the flash drive to Orlan. Laura takes the device and types, "Captured, come to location." As Kroll retrieves it, the device suddenly explodes, creating a distraction. Taking advantage, Laura fights back, but during the struggle, Kroll manages to stab her in the stomach with a knife, leaving her badly injured. Kroll then demands to know who she works for. Laura, struggling to speak, reveals that she works for Alarum, which means to call to arms. She further explains that Alarum is independent, not serving any single country or government. They operate for their own agenda. She then kills Kroll. Meanwhile, at his office, Burbridge is joined by Chris and Kirby. Kirby informs them that a French couple, Roland and Bridget, are staying at the same resort as Joe and Laura. He further explains that Roland owns a bank used to launder money for an arms dealer. Burbridge then orders Chester to launch a drone attack to eliminate Joe. Back with Joe, he is still struggling to escape while fending off the mercenaries, as Chester has already fled. Joe throws a grenade, killing several attackers. Orlan confronts him, demanding the flash drive. Joe reveals that Chester has it. The two reluctantly decide to team up to track Chester down. While driving, Joe calls Burbridge and warns him that after he deals with Chester, he's coming for him. Burbridge coldly informs Joe that the injection Chester gave him will kill him before dinner. After the call, Burbridge tracks Joe's location and dispatches 2 drones, one targeting Joe and the other Laura. The drone locks onto Laura first, but she evades it by using the dead bodies of the mercenaries as cover. The second drone targets Joe, who is still with Orlan. During the attack, their car is hit, causing them to lose control and crash into the same house where Laura is hiding. Joe successfully shoots down one of the drones, but Orlin points a gun at him, ready to pull the trigger. Before Orlin can fire, Laura appears from behind and kills him. Just then, the second drone appears in the sky and begins launching missiles at them. Despite the chaos, Joe and Laura manage to survive the attack and finally reunite. The next day, Joe and Laura arrive at a secluded lake where Chester is waiting for them. Joe wastes no time, asking Chester how much longer he has to live after being poisoned. To Chester's shock, he starts gasping for breath, realizing that he's the one poisoned instead of Joe. Panicking, Chester demands to know how Joe managed it. Joe reveals that he secretly spiked the vodka Chester brought, knowing it was intended to kill him. Desperately, Chester reaches for the antidote, but Joe snatches it from his hand. Chester pleads for the antidote, but Joe sets a condition. Chester must use his influence to convince every covert operative to join Joe's side. Together, they would put an end to director Donald Burbridge's tyranny and exact revenge for the betrayal in Poland. Chester agrees. In this way, movie ends here. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe for more interesting movie recaps.